All right, welcome everyone. I'm excited to have you here. This is this week's episode of The Career Climb. If you are not familiar with the show, The Career Climb is where we spark conversations with executives and industry leaders where they share their perspectives on leadership and workplace culture through real life cases and not theory. Tonight it's just me. Tonight it's just me. We're hosting a solo episode tonight. But if we have yet to meet, this is your first time seeing me. I'm Julia Rock, your host and the founder and CEO at Rock Career Development. We are a Houston-based consulting firm, and we help organizations with reducing turnover and increasing long-term growth through leadership transformation solutions. So simply put, we help make your leaders better so that your people stay and you make more money. And I'm just really glad to have you in the building for tonight's conversation. I'm so passionate about this topic, as you can probably tell from my excitement. But if you want to catch up on this and all past episodes of The Career Climb, you can connect with me here on LinkedIn or visit rockcareer.com/CC archive to view our YouTube playlist. And tonight, as you know, we're going to keep the conversation active. We're going to keep the conversation active. And so please go ahead and drop some things in the chat. Let us know where you're watching from. Let us know if you have any questions as we go through tonight's topic. And just let me know that this is resonating with you. And so with that, we'll go ahead and get started. And so first things though, for some reason, I know that I'm freezing a little bit. So I want to make sure that I am closing things out and making sure that my computer is not stressed out here. So give me 1 second. For some reason today, the computer decides that it's not going to cooperate, but we're gonna push through. We're gonna push through. But if you're coming to tonight's live stream, you're probably asking, what is it that is that universal skill that all leaders need? You're wondering, what is that universal skill that all leaders need? And and if you're here, I would love for you to put in the chat, if you're joining as we go through, what do you think is the one skill that leaders need? And I've heard people say as many things as they need strategy, they need vision, they need this, that, and the other thing. And all of those things are true. I don't disagree with any of that. But in my mind, I know that there are certain skills that are certain. There's a particular skill that is critically important for leaders, no matter what level they are at in an organization, no matter what they're doing, no matter what their position, C-suite to first-time leaders. I have an idea as to what the specific skill is that they may need. And so, without further ado, what is that skill? The universal skill that all leaders need is empathy. The one skill that all leaders need is empathy. And I know typically we've heard a lot about empathy, and I feel that we've created this complex idea around empathy in the workplace and emotion in the workplace and all these other things. But I feel like if we really got simple with what are the skills that leaders need, empathy would rise to the top. The reason I say that is because when you think about empathy, it is something that can single-handedly cripple your leadership or accelerate it, because empathy allows you to build trust, to create bonds with your organization, and it enables you to see where others are coming from. And so if you're asking the question, well, Julia, how do you really define empathy? How do you really define empathy? And you know what I'm going to do, guys? I'm going to take 1 extra second because for some reason the computer is still moving slowly and I don't want this to freeze for y'all. So if you give me 10 seconds of grace here, this is a live stream. And so we're gonna be adaptable here today, guys. But for some reason, the computer has stopped cooperating with me. So I want to make sure that you guys are not being impacted in terms of the quality of the program tonight. So just bear with me 1 more second. So Everybody remembers what happened in the pandemic where we had to get creative. So just give me 1 second here. Give me 1 second. Technology. Uh-oh. Now the screen's not working. Give me 1 second. I don't know what happened. Give me 1 second. Okay. Here we go. I think we're back now. Okay, I think we're back. Sorry about that, guys. Like I said, live streams, things can happen. Technology doesn't always cooperate. So if you're asking, what is empathy? When we really think about what empathy is, I decided to just Google it. I said, let me Google it and hear what uh, the Google teachers and educators have to say. And so the definition that I came across, I looked at several, but this is the one that I landed on. Empathy is the ability to emotionally understand what other people feel, see things from their point of view, and imagine yourself in their place. Essentially, it is putting yourself in someone else's position and feeling what others are feeling. So that's the baseline definition from the Google educators and teachers and instructors out there. So it's really about being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And so if you could ask yourself and think about it for 1 second, why is that an essential skill for leaders? Why is your ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes truly the universal skill? The reason is that allows you to connect with the people that you are leading. If you are unable to connect with the people that you are leading, that means you're not leading anyone anywhere. That's the long and short of it. Whether you are leading, whether you have a small team, whether you're the CEO of an organization or somewhere in the middle, if you are not able to connect with the people that work for you, if you're not able to understand them, if you can't see where they're coming from, it's impossible for you to lead in an effective manner. And so what I wanted to talk about tonight is kind of talk through many cases or many stories as I go through the different points, rather than having a full on case study, because empathy, I feel like it has so many pieces to it as to why it's critical. And so I want to make sure that we cover all of those points versus just sitting with the one case study. And thank you, Darrell, for your point here. It's a selfless act. It allows you to value differences. I love that. Empathy really allows you to value the diversity and the differences within your organization and see, hey, I may be coming from a different walk of life, but I can see where my team members are coming from. So let me give you a couple of ideas as to why empathy is important. And typically you will start with something kind of touchy feely with, hey, whether it's psychological safety or other things, and all that's important. But here's one thing I want to lead with. Empathy enables better decision making. So when you are a leader, one of the things, or one of the most important roles you have is making tough decisions. And when you have a certain level of empathy, you are able to make better decisions. I'll give you an example. I have done workshops and coaching and so forth with individuals and teams and leadership teams where having to let someone go is difficult for different reasons. Whether the person had been in the organization for a long time, whether they had something personal that was happening to them, there was a question of, can we let this person go? And I know the idea of firing people is taboo, but walk with me here. The case that I want to talk about is there was someone on a team who was dragging down the performance of everyone else around them. So this was the conversation I was having with the leader, that this individual, they weren't performing at a certain level. And so the rest of the team was then burdened with the rest of the work, more work than they already had on their plates. And then the morale of the team was declining. And so the leaders saw that the cohesion in the team was declining. They saw that, that the productivity was declining, morale, but they had hesitation about letting the person go because they said it was cruel to fire the person because of some particular situation that they had. And so so we had the discussion about what are the other opportunities for, is there another place in the organization that the person could go? And we went through and vetted a lot of the other scenarios. And apparently they had already addressed and had tried this before, and they weren't successful with moving the person to another part of the organization because they didn't want to take on that risk in other places in the organization. And so we got to the point of, at this stage, if you save the one, what happens to everyone else in your team? What else happens to the rest of your organization? And so having a frank discussion, we realized that having the person on the team was harming the overall good of the organization. But again, the leader felt like it's cruel to let this person go. And so what we got to was that you can put yourself in the shoes of the other person, that this is tough news to receive. This is impacting their livelihood. And so in order to show the right level of empathy, it is your job to communicate why this is happening and realizing that it's not a reflection on them, that it's not a reflection as to who they are as a person and the value that they offer as an individual. It's really helping them to understand, here's what we've been working on together. Here's what the directives were. And we haven't been able to meet those standards, even with the help, even with the coaching, even with rallying around with the resources, we haven't been able to give the objective. And typically, if someone knows that they're not performing at a certain level and you're willing to have an open and honest and empathetic conversation with them, they're not going to be excited about being let go, but they're more understanding. But if you're not able to tap into having that kind of empathy and being able to sit across from them and letting them know, hey, this is not a reflection on you. If you feel like it has to be one extreme or the other, then it's going to prevent you from making the right decision for your organization, which is letting that person go and helping them find an organization that might be a better fit for them. So that's just one case where, from a decision standpoint, it's tough. Letting people go is tough, but having empathy can allow you to move through that in a different way. Another area where we talk about better decision making is really about being able to look at the full picture. So stepping beyond the things that data and KPIs, we have all those things on paper, but what information is coming from the different perspectives from your team, right? So thinking about it this way, your team you may have a decision to make, and the numbers on paper say, hey, we should do this thing. We should do this right now. Go for it. But when you get the perspectives from the folks on your team to say, hey, this is what this decision will do to us. This is what this will add to our plates. This is what will happen as a result of this, that the data and the numbers don't show. Now you have enough information to better understand, okay, do I just make this decision based on the numbers? Or do I really take a look at the entire picture to figure out, is there a better solution that would still allow me to get close enough to those same objectives while not overburdening my team, burning them out, and getting poor results? So it's simple things like that, where empathy and being able to take in the perspectives and put yourselves in the shoes of other people, where that can make a difference. One of the key things that I have found with empathy is that leaders, when we feel like we get to a certain point and we've arrived, we've made it, right? We get promoted to whatever role it is, VP, SVP, C-suite. We feel like we've made it now. And we forget that we were once the analyst, or we were once the associate, or we were once the first line supervisor. We forget those things. And so when people at those levels are bringing issues forward, we expect them to make lemonade with people say, well, if you get lemons, you make lemonade. We expect people to make lemonade even without having lemons. We're like, hey, why can't they just get it done? Forgetting that we were once in their shoes and had to deal with the challenges that they dealt with. So this is another reason why empathy is so important. So let's talk about something else here. When you think about empathy, and one of the topics that I get hired most to speak about is burnout and disengagement. especially in 2025, burnout at every level of organizations is on the rise. People are tired, people are out of gas, and I got the question, I guess it was maybe a week or so ago, that to ask me, well, why is burnout today different than the burnout of, say, yesteryear? And it's the fact that people are dealing with a lot more today, whether it's the after effects of COVID, whether it's what's happening in the political and economic climate, whether it's, a crisis of conscience and purpose as they try to move forward in their careers. There are a lot of things that are contributing to burnout beyond the workload. And so as you look across the workforce, people are just out of gas and they're detaching from work. If you have the right level of empathy, you will be able to better build the relationships with your team to better suss out whether or not folks are fully engaged. Are people burning out? Are they stressed? Because one, the trust is already built, but you're going to be able to read signs in people when you can put yourself in their shoes. When you think about, okay, this person has had to work, they've worked 12 hours every day this entire week to finish this project. How is that person doing? How long is this project for? Is there some way to better manage this? My team has been working nonstop around the clock to get this thing done. The other thing that empathy will do for you, the other thing when it comes to especially assessing workload and seeing what's happening in your team, is that it also gives you a certain level of courage. And the thing about empathy and courage is when you can put yourself in the shoes of other people, then you realize that when your team is being asked to do things, when pressures are coming, you are more willing to stand in the gap for them and highlight, hey, this is not something that my team can take on right now. We don't have the capacity for that. Is there an opportunity for us to postpone this until we have more resources available? Or can I hire more resources to meet this need? Or why are we even doing this in the first place? Having that empathy and that understanding of where your team is and what they're dealing with, whether it's workload, whether it's frustration, whether it's deadlines, reflecting on that, having that at your core will allow you to be more courageous in pushing back on the things that will impact them. Yes, there are always peak periods. No matter what job you have, there's always going to be peak periods. But if your team's peak period is forever, that's a problem. If your team is constantly working around the clock, that's an issue. If you have a revolving door of employees because they feel like the workload in this organization is too much, I can't handle it, I've got to go elsewhere, these are warning signs that something else needs to change. And if you're tuned into what's happening with your employees, you can then have that courage to then say, hey, we can't take that on right now. That's just not something we can do. And you can come up with a different timeline, a different schedule, maybe a skinny version of whatever is being asked. But you would be willing to go and stand in the gap and fight back for your employees. Another thing that I want to highlight when it comes to empathy, and I want to go back to, well, before I move on, I want to go back to the noting of the workload. I want to share a particular case here. When I was in my last career, there was a boss that I had where I was going through a personal challenge, and she knew that I was good at what I did. I was getting things done, meeting all the targets, et cetera, et cetera. But I was going through a personal transition in life due to family tragedies and other things. And she realized that that something was going on with me. And we did have deliverables, we did have things that we needed to get done, but she saw where I was, and and we talked about what I was going through, and she reflected on her own experiences to talk about what she has had that was something similar. So after she and I were able to have that discussion, and I kind of bared my soul a little bit, and we got on the same page, my boss was willing to work with me to say, hey, here's what we can move around in your schedule temporarily so that you can address this personal concern. So instead of me just burning out and forcing myself to work at the breakneck pace I had been working at, even with everything that was going on, my boss was able to pick up on the fact that something was off. And then we had a conversation about it, and she was able to reflect on her own experiences, and even though it wasn't the exact same thing, she could see where I was coming from and was willing to make adjustments. And so that allowed me the space I needed to have in order to get back on the ball, get back into doing the work that I needed to do, and go back to delivering the results at the level that both I and she was accustomed to. And so again, being able to read your employees, especially if they're going through something, that's another skill that will allow you to help avoid burnout and disengagement within your team. One of the other things I want to talk about here is the tie between empathy and accountability. The reason that I want to mention that is when you have a certain level of empathy and you're building that connection with your team, they feel more seen, they feel more understood, they feel more heard. They don't feel like they're screaming into the darkness and their management isn't hearing them. They feel seen, heard, and understood. And so so think about this, as you're sitting there, if you're a leader, think about how you have felt going through your career in the times when you have felt seen and you have felt heard, you have felt, thought of, think about that for yourself. How did that make you feel? How did that make you show up after that? When employees feel seen, heard, and understood, they're more willing to show up in a different way. They're willing to take accountability for their work. They're willing to take ownership without you forcing it down their throats. I'll give you another example. So I'll give you another case study from my last career. I had a boss early in my oil and gas career, and we had to take on a project that typically would take about 9 to 12 months to complete, and we had to get it done in 4. We had to get it done in 4. And he brought the project to us and kind of asked us for our support, and we could see that he was slightly frazzled by that because, that's a compressed timeline to deliver something under. And so he could have easily just given us the directive of get this done or else. But he came to us and said, "Hey guys, this is the directive I've gotten. I need your help to get this done. I need all hands on deck. Let's work together to complete this." And after he left the room, and me and some of the other analysts, what we sat around to say is like, well, how are we going to help him get this done? Because it's very clear that this is weighing on him. Because obviously, a big project like this, it's a career booster. But if it doesn't get done, it's a career ender, essentially. So we asked ourselves, how do we help? How can we help him get this done? And we were willing to take on a lot of the work ourselves. Get it, having certain meetings, getting reports done, getting the logistics in order to complete this project. But what was the reason we were willing to do this? Is because prior to him bringing this to us, he was someone who made it his business to get to know us, to get to know where we were coming from, to ask us where we were having challenges, to keep an open door, to give us space to share. And so in him spending that time building that relationship with us, when the time came where he needed us to roll up our sleeves and put our shoulders to the wheel, we were willing to do that without any sort of hesitation. We were willing to do what he asked of us, and we were willing to take on the ownership, band together with barely any direction from him. We were giving him the updates, essentially. We were giving him the updates. Here's what we worked on. So that's the difference that empathy can make. When you are spending the time getting to know your people, understanding where they're coming from, understanding their concerns, keeping the door of communication open with them, building that trust once again. When the time comes and you need them to really get things done, they're going to be willing to go to bat for you. They're going to be willing to go to war for you. But you've got to do the work on the front end and demonstrate that empathy. And And one of the things that I also want to talk about, because I'm looking at the time here, how much time I have. So I'm on 24 minutes. So I want to make sure that I get you guys done in about 30 to 35 minutes. But one of the other things I want to talk about when it comes to empathy is that you don't have to agree with someone to empathize with them. You don't have to agree with someone. And I think that's also where we get lost, is that we feel like if we empathize with someone, if we're putting ourselves in their shoes, that means we have to agree. Empathy is not about agreeing with someone. It's about understanding where the person is coming from, being willing to put yourself in their shoes, but that doesn't mean that you have to agree to whatever they're saying. So going back to the beginning at the example at the beginning, where we talked about letting the individual go, and that was a tough decision for that leader, but you can still understand where the person is coming from. You can still understand the argument for the person to retain their employment for XYZ reason. You can understand those things, but that doesn't mean that you agree with the choice. You can still make a decision to say, I hear where you're coming from. I fully understand. But at this time, this is the decision that we need to make. And that's part of leadership influence. That's when you step into a leadership role, part of your role and part of your responsibility is influence, and also having the courage to have a difference of opinion. If you can't stand up for something, if you can't stand apart, if you can't make a different choice, it's hard for you to lead effectively, because you essentially become a yes man or a yes woman, right? So if you're taking notes from tonight's conversation, when it comes to empathy, it's critical for you to realize that empathy has nothing to do with agreeing. It's all about simply understanding where the other person is coming from. And so the last couple of points here when it comes to empathy. Often we tie empathy with listening, right? Active listening, spending the time to hear the person's kind of full story and where they're coming from. The reason why this is important is that for many leaders, we listen with the intent to respond. We put a response in the chamber, right? Like we're queued up to answer something, or we're queued up ready to fix something. Sometimes when it comes to empathy, your job is to just listen. Get the insights, get the understanding. It may not be that you have to go into fix it mode. There may not be something that's essentially broken for you to get involved in. It may be that you have to just get context to understand why something is happening the way that it's happening. And it does not require you to act and go be Superman to go fix all the things. And so I want to be clear about that. So when you think about empathy, it's about being willing to listen without having a response queued up, without thinking you have to take action right after. You may have to, but that's not always the case. It's important for you to be willing to just listen without any sort of preconceived agenda, notion, motivation, to just listen to what's being told to you so that you can understand where the person is coming from and get the context you need to understand what's happening in the environment around you and what's happening on your team. And one of the last things I want to share is empathy is a daily practice. Empathy is a daily practice. As I said, and if you saw the original post that's here that advertised this event, when it comes to leadership, we have kind of complexified the fundamentals. We have all these different buzzwords that to go along with our leadership frameworks and culture and so forth. And there's just certain things that if we just put it into practice every day, it would make us better leaders. And empathy is at the top of that list. The same way that if you want to get healthy, you start eating right and you keep a healthy diet ongoing. If you want to get in shape, you go to the gym and you work your muscles to get them in shape. Empathy is a skill. It's like a muscle that you have to develop. You have to practice. And so it's not just about if something big is happening that you're able to sit down and say, okay, now I'm being empathetic by listening to the team. It's about how are you showing up in your one-on-one conversations with, on a weekly basis or monthly, whenever you have one-on-ones or check-ins with your team. What's it like when you're giving feedback? What's it like when you're giving feedback? Let me take a moment to stop and talk about feedback. What I have found when I have worked with leaders is that sometimes feedback is on two extremes. It's that it's no feedback, or it's like, you're doing great, you're doing awesome, and that's all you get. Or it's on the other extreme where the feedback is so brutal that it's hard for the person to understand what they can do to change, because they've been attacked by, well, this just wasn't good, you didn't do so and so, you didn't do so and so, and the person just feels attacked. Neither of those two things are successful feedback. But if you're empathetic and you understand what it was like when you were building your career, when you were getting into leadership, when you were starting out, if you think about what it was like to get feedback, or the feedback you wish you got, that can help inform how you communicate with your team. And for sure, you should get to know each person's communication style to make sure you're resonating with them. But by and large, if you were to take the extra second to think about, what was it like when I got tough feedback, when I didn't get things done? How did it make me feel when I was getting ripped a new one in front of everybody? It sucked. I mean, think about those times. It's, those times when you have gotten ripped in front of everyone, or even ripped in private, even if that has happened, it still wasn't a good feeling. And then on the other extreme, when you've gotten the pat on the head feedback, good job, how did that help you develop? It didn't change anything for you. It didn't move the needle because you didn't know what step to take to improve your performance. So knowing those two things about your own experience, how can you now show up to give solid feedback? And no one's saying to gloss over the tough parts, but you can let someone know that expectations were not met with something, and you can still do it in an empathetic manner. And one of the things that I talk about when I work with with clients on feedback is, what has the person done well and what have they not done well, but put it in context as to why that matters. So if someone gave a presentation and let's say they fumbled the words, or they gave the incorrect stats or something, it's easy to say that thing in isolation, and then that person feels that they're attacked, right? Like, okay, you didn't do well, you didn't speak up loud enough, whatever the case is. But if you are willing to put it into context, this is why this issue matters. Here's why putting the incorrect stat in there, this is the issue that it causes. So this is why this is something that we need to work on. So you did a great job on X, Y, and Z, but here's why this piece matters. So I don't want to lose sight of the great work that you did, but I want to make sure that we also focus on this, and this is why. It then opens the door for the person to understand, okay, this is not an attack on me. This is not an attack on my ability to perform or to do my job. It's more so, hey, if we don't do it well, this is the impact for all of us. This is the impact for the organization. This is what it means to the broader vision, broader strategy, whatever. And so I want to just highlight that as well. When you think about the feedback that you give as a leader, no matter where you are in the organization, CEO on down, what kind of feedback are you giving? And are you giving it in an empathetic way where the person can understand where you're coming from and vice versa? They're not feeling attacked, but you're still getting the point across. And in other areas where you're looking at being empathetic, again, it's on a daily basis. What kind of conversations are you having with your team? How are you handling when people, like as a group, if something hasn't been done, are you flying off the handle? If something hasn't been, are you flying off the handle and making it seem like Armageddon has happened? Or are you taking the time to understand why something may not have been done, why a deadline may not have been met, and what the solution is from this point? Again, not glazing over something. Leaders, I'm not going to tell leaders not to get angry. I think that's bad advice. Human beings get angry. Human beings get frustrated. We get sad. And if we try to be positive all the time, that's toxic. So I'm not going to be one of those folks. But the question is, how do you handle your anger? How do you handle your frustration? And empathy is what can drive you to handling those interactions and those emotions differently when you're dealing with your team and the results that they may not have delivered in a particular moment. And it helps you to understand, how do we move forward together instead of us being at odds because I'm frustrated and I've lashed out at the team. And so the last thing I want to mention is, I want you to think about what happens if you don't practice empathy. What happens in your organization? Because it's easy to say, well, Julia, this is giving me the warm and fuzzies and just, talking to your team and building relationships. But I want you to think about it. If you are not empathetic with your team, what happens? It cascades through every level of your organization. First and foremost, if your team does not trust you, because empathy helps to build trust. If your team doesn't trust you, there's going to be something that's potentially broken in the background, and you're not going to find out until it's too late because they're afraid to tell you. I'll give you an example from my own career. I had a team when I was working in Baton Rouge, and I was over in Belgium on an assignment. I think Belgium or Singapore, one of the two. And one of my team members back in Baton Rouge had to call me because of an issue that came forward. And they had a discussion about, well, who's going to call Julia to tell her? And then one of my analysts decided he was going to call me, and we had the conversation. And I think about that in the sense of, if I hadn't had a relationship with my team where they felt comfortable about telling me what the screw up was, this could have been something that was festering for the entire time I was out of the country, and I get back, and it's probably more of an issue and more urgent when I get back. But instead, we were able to get on the phone, talk about what the issue was, decide on an interim solution until I got back, and no harm done. And so when you think about, your teams, do you have the level of trust with them that they're willing to bring things forward? Or are you going to find it out after the fact? The second thing in terms of what happens if you don't have empathy, that's going to cascade throughout your team in terms of how they treat each other, how much grace they're willing to give each other, what kind of support they're willing to give each other, because you set the tone and the temperature for your organization as a leader, especially the further up the chain that you go. When you're getting into the director, senior director, VP, SVP, so on and so on, when you're getting up there, your responsibility is a lot greater when it comes to setting the tone and temperature of an entire organization. So if you show that you don't have empathy, if you show that you don't really care what other people are going through, if you show that you're not willing to put yourself in other people's shoes, that cascades through everyone who works for you. And you have to think about, what kind of a work environment would you be fostering if people within your teams don't have empathy towards each other? What kind of collaboration will you have? What kind of innovation will you have? Because people are going to be afraid to fail and try things because they're not going to get any grace. And so your organization can stay stagnant. That means that edges you out of the competition in certain places in your market, which impacts your bottom line. And so you have to think about, empathy is not just this touchy-feely thing that your HR people can come and hire a consultant to come talk about. It's not just a course for your online learning platform for people to take and check a box. It cascades, and it's essential to every area of your business, every area of your team, every area of your life as a leader. Empathy is a through line. And when you don't have empathy, that means that your people can't connect with you, which means you're more likely to find another organization that where they will feel more supported, more connected, which means that they leave you, which increases turnover costs, which again goes back to your bottom line. So while on the one hand, there's the emotional resonance and the emotional part of empathy and why it's important in terms of psychological safety, building trust, but there's a real bottom line hard number that can arise from a lack of empathy within your organization. Or on the positive side, what happens, right? If your team is engaged and energized because you're showing up with a certain level of empathy, they're going to work harder. They're going to try things. They're going to get creative. They're going to work together to come up with different ideas. And what does that mean for your business, your organizational growth? your ability to enter new markets. What does that mean for your team and for your company? And so I want to leave you with that for you to think about that a little bit. And if you have any questions before we wrap up, please go ahead and drop them in the chat. But I'm truly passionate about the topic of empathy when it comes to leadership, because it is the one skill that all leaders need, and I don't feel like we talk about it in plain enough language. I feel like we've cloaked it with so many buzzwords and assessments and other complicated tools that we've lost sight of what it really means, which is simply seeking to understand the person across from you, understand their feelings, and being willing to put yourself in their shoes. And so with that, I want to say thank you so much for joining tonight's conversation. And if you have additional questions that we didn't get to here in tonight's discussion, please feel free to go ahead and comment on the post, or you can send me a DM on whatever platform you're watching this on, and I'll be happy to address those. If your organization is in need of a conversation like this when it comes to empathy, a plain discussion, we're not going to get into all the fluffy language and the academia of it. If your organization is ready for a plain, down to earth, honest discussion about why empathy matters in your company and in your business and in your teams, please go ahead and connect with me. Again, you can DM me or you can send me an email at hello@rockcareer.com. Again, that email is hello@rockcareer.com. I'd love to hear from you and work with your organization. We will be back next week. The Career Climb will be back next week. I will have a special guest, and we've got a great topic. The flyer for that will go out in the next day or so. So connect with me here on LinkedIn. Follow the page so that you can see who will be here next. But thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for joining. Hopefully you got some insights as to how to be more empathetic with your team, and perhaps there are things that you can take into your personal life as well, at home, with family, with friends. And so thank you again for watching this episode of The Career Climb, and I'll see you next time.